Welcome to this week's Riks Round Up. My name is Rebecca, and panelists today are Elias Nordgren and Peter Kleppe, editors for Riks Europe. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
So today we will be covering, of course, the US elections. We can't not cover it considering how close it actually is. We'll also be talking about this murder in Southport and the charges towards the suspect, and migration policy changes in Europe. So let's get into it. Elias, the election is, as said, very close. The rallies are continuing, the latest in Wisconsin. We see pro-Palestinian protesters interrupting Harris rallies, and Trump is also distancing himself from this comedian who called Puerto Rico garbage. How will these actions affect the campaigns, if at all, in your view?
Well, it's probably in the days closest to the election that most people who are undecided, which is a quite considerable part of the electorate, is going to make their decision. And I think all of these events happening in the final days of the election are actually quite impactful oftentimes. People often talk about the so-called October surprise, that is something within the last few weeks or the last month of the election cycle that changes everybody's view entirely on the two candidates. And we haven't really seen any one particular thing that has had that effect. But I mean, this comedian scandal that apparently there was a comedian at Donald Trump's Madison Square Garden appearance who made a disparaging joke about Puerto Rico. This may have affected the likeliness of Puerto Ricans living in the United States to vote for him. Now, some pollsters actually show that he may have lost Pennsylvania to Kamala Harris as a result of this. I mean, we don't know that for sure, of course, but it's an interesting turn of events since Donald Trump has been riding on a high in opinion polls as of late, and we'll see where the election ends up.
And Peter, do you think that pro-Palestinian protesters interrupting Harris could have any effect on her numbers?
Well, that's not a new thing. Indeed, the Democratic Party is sort of weak on its left flank. And there, especially in a certain number of swing states, you have this American Arabs that are angry at the Democrats for what they see as not sufficiently backing up the Palestinian side in the conflict with Israel. Now, I do think if you ask ordinary people, the people that Elias refers to that decide last minute, people in the middle, typically they won't pick on all the nitty-gritty detail. And indeed, I think this joke about Puerto Rico may have an effect, especially given the fact that, according to some experts, Pennsylvania is the ultimate swing state, so decisive that whoever takes Pennsylvania will win the presidency. However, that's not the end of it, because the Republicans came back, said, look, there is actually a trash collection crisis in Puerto Rico, and he was referring to that. Well, I'm not sure if that's going to fly with the Puerto Rican minority in the States. But after that, Joe Biden explicitly called the supporters of Trump trash. Now, afterwards, he tried to walk back his comments. He said, look, I was referring to this comedian. And then we have sort of ended in some kind of an interpretation game of what Biden actually meant. But that was not a good look for Biden. And immediately, Team Trump jumped on it, even to the point that Trump was seen together with his ally Vivek Ramaswamy in a trash truck, collecting the trash, and posing with trash collectors. So I think the jury is still out on who will come out of this on top. But it's very important, these kind of little incidents. Often that's the only thing that people pick up from these debates.
It's also worth saying, of course, that maybe not all Puerto Ricans are going to be that affected by this one particular joke. They're not necessarily going to connect it to Donald Trump or his policies. Many in the Trump camp have been saying that actually Latinos and Puerto Ricans love Trump because they're mostly blue collar, and blue collar people tend to appreciate Trump. And that's why also he has a significant amount of support among Latino men, not the very least. So this may not have affected the outcome at all.
Moving on to our second subject for the day, Southport attack, murder suspect Axel Rudakubana in court over recent and Al-Qaeda manual charges. This is a headline from Sky News. Peter, could you tell us, update us on what's happening here?
Well, we all remember the riots in Britain this summer. Now, the riots were were sort of a response to the murder of 3 young girls in that town in England. There was, of course, a lot of misinformation. Nobody really knew what was going on. But basically, the great and good of the media and politicians were criticizing these rioters for jumping to conclusions, for saying, look, you think that this is a foreigner, he appears to be not a foreigner, you think that this is a fanatic Muslim, and the last thing is something that is coming to haunt them now, because it just came out that an Al-Qaeda manual was found in the home of that murderer. So I don't think you have to be a genius to connect A and B. It looks like this person is some kind of an Islamist fanatic, like we have seen many. Of course, also nasty crimes are committed by other people, but so the instinct of many people appeared to be right after all. And this is, of course, now causing a big backlash, with people asking, look, why did the police not came out of this? With a journalist disclosing that she had heard from a policeman that he was an Islamist, but she didn't have enough intel to write about it, and then was told by the authorities not to write about it, and she complied. And now she's quite angry about that. So I think this is really something that should not be underestimated, and it's of course adding to the fuel of the whole debate that there is too much migration, uncontrolled migration, and as a result, people like this also entering the UK.
I also think that as a result of it was called misinformation or disinformation at first, when it was claimed that the perpetrator of the knife attacks was a Muslim. Well, if it turns out he actually is an Islamic, a jihadist, then that's going to further destroy the trust that people have in the institutions of Britain. I mean, this looks as if it's a police or a media cover-up of who this perpetrator was and what his motives were. There was also a lot of outrage actually about, we actually know now that he may have been ideologically inclined towards Islamism, but they still refuse to label this crime a terror crime. The stabbing in and of itself. He's actually only charged with a terrorist crime on account of actually having this terrorist manual, this Al-Qaeda manual. So there's a lot of questions that I think a lot of people have regarding this, and it's not really going to come. It's not looking very pretty.
And we have to move on to our third subject for the day. The Netherlands is set to introduce significant migration reforms. Peter, could you tell us what is happening now?
So in the Netherlands, finally, a new right-wing government has been formed with the party, the right-wing populist party of Geert Wilders, as the leading party in the government, even if the Prime Minister, Mr. Dick Schoof, is a technocrat. Now, there was just a compromise agreed at the level of the Dutch cabinet, which includes a whole range of measures to stop the migration chaos. One of the measures is not to no longer spread out asylum seekers across the country. I think that's a good idea, because people can travel anyway. That was nonsense in the first place. It was some kind of a fake measure presented as a solution by the previous left-leaning government. A second measure is that people will no longer receive asylum forever. When the situation in their homeland improves, they will be asked to return over there, which strikes me as very reasonable if you have a shortage of spots for asylum seekers in your country. Obviously, it would be a terrible idea to then reserve these spots for people that actually are no longer in danger. So a whole range of these measures have been approved. Also border checks at the border. I'm Belgian myself. I'm not a big fan of this. I'm actually a big fan of the Schengen area. But of course, when you cannot protect your external border, I don't think you have any other chance than to try to introduce more internal checks. And we have seen now the first results in Germany, where the police was actually managing to stop a number of asylum seekers or illegals, I should say, a number of human smugglers, of course, also a number of criminals. Yes, obviously it's easy to sort of circumvent the police checks. You can just take the little roads, but apparently many of these people are not so intelligent to actually do that. Maybe I should add that it's not just in the Netherlands, in France and Germany that you have more tough migration policies, but also even in my own country, Belgium, even with the outgoing left-wing government, they have have a more speedy procedure for asylum processing. And now it just came out that 95% of the requests are being denied, 95% of the asylum requests. Obviously, it will be very difficult to now send these people back to their countries of origin, as we know, because there's still not a deal at the European level to agree, Australian-style outsourcing of migration. But I think we're making a lot of progress even at the EU level.
And keeping on this subject, but with a different headline from Politico, the EU wants to deport migrants. It needs the help of Syria's Assad. Elias, what are the motivations behind trying to create a normalization between Italy and EU countries, the ties with Syria?
I think this is one of the more interesting things that have come out of the last few months of the discussion on the migration topic in the EU. This was also part of, I believe, the Dutch plan to actually recognize some parts of Syria, which is still plagued by civil war, to be safe zones to return to, so they can actually have some of the Syrian migrants return to their home country. And the Italian Prime Minister Meloni actually opened up to and brought this up on the EU summit meeting, if I'm not mistaken, that EU should be working towards normalizing relations with the Syrian dictator, just in order to be able to return all of these migrants, many of whom are probably illegal, but that are scattered all across Europe. I mean, there's a number of, I think, 1.2 million Syrians that have left Syria for Europe, and this is a very problematic group in most countries where it's arriving. It's responsible for a lot of crime. They are vastly overrepresented in many different types of crimes, in particular rape. Obviously, this is something we know very well from Sweden and also from Germany. I think this is a very interesting proposal if Europe were to normalize relations with Syria, because it's very controversial. I mean, most of Europe is now actually behind, maybe we shouldn't let in infinite amounts of asylum seekers or other types of migrants, but this is actually a contentious issue. For example, the right-wing government in Sweden would never side with this, considering it has vast geopolitical significance, because Syria is considered to be a vassal, not a vassal state, but a close ally to Putin's Russia. And this would probably mean conceding geopolitical influence to Russia. That's probably how many people on the right are seeing this proposal. Now, in Italy and maybe in for example, Germany, with Alternative for Germany and the National Rally in France, I don't think a lot of people have that much of a problem with this. But in many other countries, in Eastern Europe in particular, and in the Nordic countries, this could actually be a very sensitive issue. But I'm very happy it was actually brought up, because I think this is a quite constructive way to go to actually make sure that Syrians can leave Europe.
And Peter, how realistic do you think this is, creating conditions for Syrian refugees to return sustainably and safely?
I do think that we shouldn't have any taboos. Obviously, Assad is a nasty dictator. But then there's many people that are being denied asylum that are coming from countries with nasty dictators and then are asked to return over there. Now, Syria is a very complicated case because it's practically divided up in 4 different zones. With, I think, the Kurds are governing one in practice, and then of course you have Assad, and then the anti-Assad rebels. So I guess you have to look a bit case by case. If somebody is like from the Assad opposition, but he can safely go back to one of the other zones, that should also be considered. But then you would have some kind of an understanding with that de facto government over there. It just illustrates that ultimately, I think, if you, in the grander scheme of things, you need to have some third country where people can, go safely. People that are denied asylum in Europe. It doesn't mean that because we deny asylum in Europe that we cannot provide safety for them. But of course, if you would do something like that, then you need to go way bigger than just the Australian model. Then you need to think of what I've proposed in the past: refugee cities, places where the people can go also that are not just on the run for political persecution, but basically for economic misery. There's basically 2 billion people that are, completely understandably keen to leave their hellholes where they come from. But obviously we cannot welcome them all. And that's also why we need to change all these international regulations that still, assume that the West can welcome all the more than 100 million actual refugees in the world. There's no popular support for this whatsoever. So why not just bring, the law in line with or the effective democratic willingness that exists today?
That's all we have time for today. Thank you very much for your commentary.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Riks Europe.